The moment I saw my house key labeled ours instead of mom's, I knew something inside my family had shifted forever. My daughter-in-law's smile was polite, but the message was clear. I was no longer part of my own home. I didn't shout or beg. I just walked out quietly and started my paper trail. What came next turned that single key into the start of justice, truth, and redemption. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from, your state, your town, or maybe somewhere that once felt like home too. It was just after sunrise when I drove up to Lyle's house, the air still thick with Florida humidity. My cinnamon rolls were still warm, wrapped in the same kitchen towel I'd used since he was a boy. I told myself this was just another Sunday. Coffee, conversation, a little laughter. But as soon as I stepped into the foyer, something felt wrong. The scent of lavender cleaner hit first. Then I noticed the entryway, completely rearranged. The coat hooks were in a different place. The family portrait that used to hang beside the mirror, the one from Thanksgiving, where I stood beside Lyle, was gone. In its place was a corkboard covered with photos of Jody's family, a printed quote, and the words, "Our vision board," written in bright marker. I smiled anyway. Jody's been redecorating, I said softly to myself. When I reached for the key rack, I froze. My keychain wasn't labeled Mom's anymore. A new tag written in neat script read Ours. I blinked, wondering if it was a mistake. But there was only one hook now, and it belonged to them. A small chill moved through my chest. I swallowed it down. "Morning, Mom," Lyle called from the kitchen. I forced a smile. "Morning, honey. I brought breakfast." Jody didn't look up from her phone when I entered. She just said, "Oh, that's sweet," in that tone people use when they don't mean it. The rest of the day played out like a polite performance. I laughed where I should, commented on the weather, and ignored the knot forming in my stomach. By dinner, I'd convinced myself I was imagining things. That is, until Jody set her wine glass down and said, almost casually, "Lyle and I have been talking. We think it'd be best if the house had just one family living here full time." I waited for her to laugh. She didn't. Lyle avoided my eyes, stabbing at his peas. It'll be easier for everyone. Mom, less back and forth." "Oh," I said, my voice lighter than it should have been. "Of course, dear. Whatever works best for the family." The fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate with a sharp clink. No one spoke after that. When the meal ended, I stood to gather the dishes, but Jody stopped me. "You don't have to worry about that anymore," she said, smiling thinly. "We'll manage everything here now." "Of course," I repeated. I reached for my keys again before leaving, the ones hanging neatly beneath the word ours. The message was clear, though no one said it aloud. On the way out, I glanced at the living room wall. The family portrait was back, but cropped. My part was gone. At 7:42 p.m., I stood outside on the porch. The air was cool, and the porch light flickered above me. I held my key in my hand, the one I'd used to open that door for over 30 years, and placed it back on the hook. "It's yours now," I whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. I didn't look back. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to the car. Mrs. Unhanley from next door waved. I smiled back, mechanical and hollow. The streetlights flickered along the Florida cul-de-sac as I drove away. When I reached my condo, it was 8:11 p.m. I set my purse down, turned on the kettle, and stood in silence as it began to hum. My laptop chimed. A new email. Subject: property ownership updated. Verification required. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then, softly, almost to myself. I said, "I thought I left my home, but maybe it wasn't gone yet." The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the spare room, the one I used to call my family room. It had 2 twin beds for the grandkids, a shelf of picture frames, and a faint smell of lavender from the sachets I'd placed months ago. Now, half of those frames lay face down in the box I was packing. I didn't bring much, just the essentials, some photos, insurance papers, a worn cardigan. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if noise might break whatever fragile order I still had left. Through the thin walls, I heard laughter from the neighboring unit, young voices, carefree. For a second, it sounded like Lyle's laugh when he was 12. I pressed my hand against my chest and waited until it passed. Before I zipped the suitcase, I glanced toward the balcony light. It flickered, faintly and irregularly, just like the porch light at their house. Some signs follow you whether you want them to or not. The drive home was short, but the streets felt endless. Every light turned green as if the city wanted me to keep going, not think, just move. The car smelled faintly of cinnamon from the rolls I'd brought earlier that day, a scent already tied to rejection. I passed the park where I'd taught Lyle to ride his bike, the small bakery where his father and I used to share coffee before work. Every corner carried a ghost of the woman I'd been, a mother, a wife, a person with a place to belong. The radio played an old tune from the 70s, one my husband used to hum while changing the oil in his truck. I whispered to the empty seat. I thought I raised a man, not a stranger. My voice didn't shake. It was too tired for that. When I pulled into my condo lot, the headlights cut across the white stucco walls. It was the same place I'd once called my retreat, tonight. It felt like exile. There was a letter waiting in the mail slot, official, crisp, cold. Notice of property update. The envelope felt heavy, as if it already knew what it was about to tell me. I set my suitcase down, switched on my laptop, and logged into the title company portal. My name was gone, just like that, erased. Co-owner, Lyle Crow, Jody Crow. That was it. I scrolled twice, then stopped. My reflection stared back from the screen, dim, blue lit, older than I remembered. They didn't just want me out, I said softly. They rewrote the story. The words didn't echo. They settled into the air like dust. I remembered the nights of balancing the checkbook, the day I signed the first mortgage paper, the times I fixed the leaking sink myself because Lyle was too busy. They forgot who built it, I whispered. Instead of crying or calling anyone, I went to the cabinet and pulled out my old accordion file, yellowed but organized. Mortgage receipts, home insurance, renovation permits, all labeled in neat handwriting. I started scanning them one by one. Thunder rolled outside, soft at first, then louder. The smell of rain seeped through the window screens. My teacup sat untouched beside the keyboard, a small symbol of patience turned into resolve. I typed a short email to my friend Clara, an attorney. Need to confirm deed access. Possible unauthorized title change. Then, in the silence that followed, I said to no one, "They wanted me gone. Let's see how far they can go." I stepped onto the balcony when the scans finished uploading. The night air carried a faint mix of sea salt and rain. In the distance, I could see the dim glow of the street near their house. "I gave them a home," I murmured, and they turned it into a statement. The words didn't sound bitter, just real. I held my phone, thinking of calling Lyle, but it buzzed before I could decide. A notification appeared. Title alert. Discrepancy detected. My reflection in the glass looked split, half in light, half in shadow. For the first time that night, I didn't feel erased. I felt awake. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll remind them whose name built that foundation. The morning sun in St. Petersburg was too bright for the kind of day I was about to have. Dew clung to my windshield, and the smell of salt drifted from the bay as I drove toward the house I used to call mine. I told myself it was just to check the mail, maybe water the plants, but something inside knew I was walking into another blow. When I turned into the driveway, a sharp orange color caught my eye. A notice, bold, taped to the front door, flapping in the breeze like a flag of humiliation. 72-hour notice. Occupancy review. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. Then the words blurred, rearranged themselves in my mind until the truth sank in. Jody had filed a complaint. She claimed I was an unauthorized occupant. In my own house. My knees weakened, but I didn't fall. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped photos, 3, from different angles. The paper crackled each time the wind moved it, a cruel reminder that even air could be unkind. A couple of neighbors peeked out from their porches. One waved, uncertain. I raised my chin and waved back, steady as stone. The county clerk's office was crowded, as always, lines of people clutching folders, waiting to be processed like files instead of lives. When it was finally my turn, I slid my ID across the glass and asked, I need to confirm ownership of property at 214 Brookhaven Lane. The young clerk, no older than my grandson, typed briskly. Yes, ma'am. Your name's still on the deed. I felt my lungs release air I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but before I could thank him, he frowned. There was a transfer request last week. It was flagged as incomplete, missing a signature. Whose request? I asked. He hesitated. I'm not allowed to say, but it wasn't you. The fluorescent lights above reflected against the window separating us. I saw both our faces in that reflection, his nervous, mine calm. The truth was sitting there, transparent but untouchable, like light behind glass. I smiled faintly. That's all I needed to know. I walked out without looking back, the rhythm of my heels steady, deliberate. Each step said, "You didn't break me." Back at the condo, I set my handbag down and dialed the title company. After 2 holds and 1 polite transfer, a woman's voice came on the line. Mrs. Morley, there's no official listing under your file. Someone tried to change owner access, but the authorization failed. My pulse slowed, then steadied. Can you send me the activity logs, timestamps, IP addresses, any email used? Of course, ma'am. You'll have them within the hour. When the call ended, I sat for a moment in silence. On my laptop screen, the words "no listing found" blinked back at me like a challenge. It wasn't just a system message. It was proof that I still existed, even if someone wanted me deleted. The email arrived sooner than expected. Attached was a CSV file, cold, plain, filled with lines of data. But in the middle of it was the address. Jody, Crowey Homestead Finance, Guanicom. I printed the page, clipped it neatly into a folder labeled House. Each motion felt ritualistic: paper, hole punch, clip, breath. You taught me how to keep records. Jody, I whispered, thank you. The bitterness in my chest turned into something else, a strange, quiet pride. I'd built my life through precision, through care. And that's exactly how I would take it back. By evening, the sky had melted into orange and purple streaks. I sat on my balcony with the kettle heating behind me. On the counter, the bright orange 72-hour notice lay beside the growing stack of documents and screenshots. When the kettle began to whistle, I reached over and turned it off before it could scream. The silence that followed was almost musical. "They gave me 72 hours to disappear," I said softly, watching the steam fade. "I'll use them to reappear, stronger than ever." The camera of my mind panned to the distant lights of the house I'd left behind. Somewhere inside, Jody was likely toasting her small victory. She didn't know that the system she'd manipulated was already shifting back toward me. Tomorrow, I thought, she'll learn that truth has its own clock, and it just started ticking. I spent the late morning at my kitchen table, which had slowly turned into a command center. The steam from my black tea curled over a laptop, a yellow legal pad, and 3 pens lined up in military precision. My phone was already on speaker when a woman from the electric company answered. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "We show a transfer request submitted 2 days ago." "To whose name?" I asked, though I already knew. "Jody Crow," she replied, but it was denied. "The property's primary holder remains the Morley Family Trust." The word trust made me smile, because that's exactly what they'd lost. I requested a written confirmation email, then repeated the same process with water and internet providers. Each one gave the same answer, denied, each time. I wrote the case number neatly into my notebook. The hum of the refrigerator felt like applause. By the time my tea went cold, the table looked less like chaos and more like order reclaimed. Next came insurance. I dialed the homeowner's office and was transferred to Avery, a patient man with a soft southern drawl. "Policy's still active," he said. "Payee remains the trust. Any authorization change requires a trustee's signature, meaning you, Mrs. Morley." "Would you mind sending me a PDF letter stating that?" I asked. He chuckled. "You really like things in writing. I've learned paper doesn't tremble the way people do." By noon, I had the document printed, signed, and filed into a folder labeled Operations. The stack was growing, each sheet a silent testimony that structure still favored me. Just as I started making lunch, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Normally, I'd ignore it, but the first words of the post made me freeze. "Thrown out by my cruel mother-in-law, Yuma were homeless. She kept the house." The profile picture was Jody's, smiling beside my son. Hundreds of comments followed. Pity, outrage, strangers condemning a woman they'd never met. I didn't comment. I didn't even sigh. I opened a new folder called Evidence and began taking screenshots. Every comment, every timestamp, every edit. Then I saw the line that changed everything. "We'll get it listed anyway." Her arrogance did my work for me. I emailed the captures to Zara, the paralegal who worked with my attorney. Subject line, "Public statement preserved." Zara replied within minutes. "Perfect. Keep archiving. No public engagement. Truth stands taller in silence." I followed orders. I created a master log cataloging every denial, every insurance confirmation, every post. I exported the files to a read-only drive and labeled it Owner of Record. The cursor blinked for a second longer than usual, and I found myself smiling. It looked like a heartbeat, steady, alive. This was what strategy felt like, not noise. Precision. Near dusk, I drove past the old house. The porch light was on, curtains drawn halfway. I didn't stop. I just parked across the street long enough to photograph the mailbox label, Current Occupant. A neighbor's wind chime tinkled in the warm air. I breathed it in, then put the car in drive. That small sound, the one they thought I'd left behind, followed me as I pulled away. Back home, I balanced my checkbook, logged receipts, and listed tomorrow's objectives on a notepad. HOA bylaws, title archive, public meeting schedule. My final note of the day read, "Silence is not surrender. It's strategy." I set the folder of evidence by the door. Ready for the morning? Tomorrow, the world would hear without me saying a word. The HOA notice arrived mid-morning. Subject line plain, tone deceptively polite. Quarterly meeting, agenda, ownership clarifications. My name was listed right beneath Jody's. I knew what that meant. I printed the email, slipped it into my folder marked Operations, and laid out my papers on the table. The house was silent except for the kettle clicking off. I dressed carefully. Beige blazer, the silver pin that had belonged to my late husband. It grounded me, like a small reminder that I had once signed the mortgage papers with a steady hand. In the mirror, I met my own reflection and whispered, paper over gossip, always. The HOA hall buzzed with that particular kind of small-town tension, everyone pretending they weren't there for drama, while leaning forward to catch every word. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and furniture polish. Jody was already there, standing near the projector screen, her posture sharp, like a TV anchor rehearsing her lines. I greeted the chairperson with a calm smile and took a seat toward the back. The projector flickered to life. On the screen appeared an image of my old property, the one that had cost 30 years of my paychecks and every ounce of my marriage. Item 2, the chair began, clarification of title ownership, 347 Bay Harbor Drive. Jody's voice cut through before he could continue. It's under our name now. The records just haven't caught up yet. The chair paused. We'll confirm that shortly. Mrs. Crow? I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. The silence was a tool. I'd learned that over a lifetime of being interrupted. The chair scrolled through the county's digital portal, the sound of clicking keys echoing through the room. One by one, the records appeared. Deed history, ownership verification, tax filings. Then the projector froze on a single line. Owner of record, Morley Family Trust, C. 1998. A collective gasp rippled across the hall. Jody blinked rapidly, her cheeks flushing pink under the fluorescent lights. The chair turned to me. Ms. Morley, you remain the owner of record. I inclined my head slightly. That trust paid for the community's first park bench, if I recall. A few soft chuckles broke the tension. Jody's lips parted, but no sound came. The cursor blinked beneath my name. Steady. Rhythmic. Alive. The chair cleared his throat. Records are clear. Thank you, Ms. Morley, for attending. I nodded once. The power of fact had a sound. Quiet but absolute. The secretary began reading the draft minutes aloud. Item 2, clarification complete. Ownership remains under the original Morley Family Trust. The words landed like small hammers. Jody's husband, my son, shifted uncomfortably beside her. I could see him avoiding my gaze, shame flickering like a faulty bulb. I took the attendance sheet and signed neatly, the pen not trembling once. Minutes don't lie, I whispered to myself. They keep what people try to erase. Those words stayed in the air longer than I expected. Heavy, true, and final. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached me with nods and quiet gratitude. One woman said softly, "It's good to see fairness still matters." I smiled, careful not to let the triumph show too much. It was never about winning, I told her, just about truth being visible. As I stepped into the cool Florida evening, I heard Jody's muffled sob inside the hall. I paused, hand on the car door, and exhaled slowly. Then I drove away, headlights reflecting on the glass door where my name still shone from the projected screen. Tomorrow. I wouldn't have to say anything at all. A uniformed officer would do it for me. The morning sun over St. Petersburg felt sharper than usual, like light cutting through glass. I stood at the curb in front of the house I'd built, holding the folder that had become my armor. Every page, every signature, proof that I was still the owner. A white patrol car eased up to the driveway. The officer stepped out. Tall, even-toned, his presence quiet but commanding. "Mrs. Perry?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. He looked over my documents and nodded. "You're within full rights to enter. I'll walk with you." We moved together up the driveway. The sound of gravel beneath our shoes punctuated the silence, like truth arriving late but on time. When Jody opened the door, she looked startled. Hair unbrushed, eyes red. "You can't just walk in here." The officer held out a hand. "Ma'am, she's the owner of record." Her mouth fell open. I met her eyes and simply nodded once. That was all it took. Inside, everything felt rearranged, my home, but not my rhythm. The living room had been painted a pale gray, and the photo of my husband, Ray, was turned backward on the mantel. The officer read from the civil order. "Per Florida statute, you have 24 hours to vacate voluntarily before forced removal procedures begin." Jody looked to Lyle, who stood behind her like a shadow that had forgotten its source. I walked toward the photo frame, lifted it, turned it upright again. The image caught the light. Ray smiling at me across decades. "This property isn't yours to trespass," I said quietly. The officer stopped mid-note, looked at me, and gave a single, slow nod. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. My voice didn't echo, but it landed like a gavel. I began moving through each room, documenting, photographing, breathing evenly. My heart didn't race. It counted. They made my home feel foreign, I thought. But even strangers can't erase a deed. Upstairs, I ran my fingers along the carved initials on the banister. A +R. 1983. I remembered Ray's laughter as the wood splintered under his careless chisel, how he promised to repaint it one day. We never did. I was glad. Imperfection had outlasted betrayal. The officer stood quietly near the hallway, clipboard in hand, watching professionalism meet history. Outside, Jody collapsed onto the steps. Her sobs were sharp, uncontrolled, the sound of power unraveling. Lyle didn't move. His hands were in his pockets, his face pale. "Ma'am, everything's documented," the officer said. "You're clear." "I was always clear," I replied. It wasn't cruelty. It was the truth, simple and heavy. I walked past them to my car, the morning air thick with the scent of damp jasmine from the garden she once claimed she'd planted. My shoes clicked against the driveway in measured rhythm. Each step sounded like punctuation to the end of a long sentence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Back at my condo, I placed the signed civil report into my house folder and set it beside the others. A growing record of dignity reclaimed. I poured tea and sat at the window, staring at the same sunlight that had touched the house an hour ago. I didn't feel triumph. I felt quiet release, the kind that comes when truth doesn't need a witness to exist. The officer's words replayed in my mind like a verdict. She's the owner of record. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe fully. They'd given me a deadline to disappear. Instead, I'd given them a moment they'd never forget. A mic drop made of silence. That evening, across town, group chats began to light up. Screenshots, messages, whispers. The story was spreading. And for once, it was true. I gave it a week. 7 sunrises of quiet breakfasts and long walks along Boca Ciega Bay, letting the salt air scrub the courthouse smell out of my lungs. When I finally went back to the little cafe near the marina, I took my usual corner table, unfolded the newspaper, and stirred my tea as if the spoon could keep time from speeding up. 2 women at the counter lowered their voices, which only made their words travel farther. That young couple who took someone's house, one said, "Can you imagine?" Another added, "HOA confirmed it. Wasn't theirs at all." I kept my eyes on the lifestyle section. Truth does a better job without me holding a megaphone. I let the room hum, lifted the cup, and tasted cinnamon I hadn't ordered, memory sneaking in like spice. I set the cup down carefully, not to rattle the saucer or my heart. By the afternoon, the neighborhood grapevine had turned into a trellis. On the HOA forum, someone uploaded a screenshot of the county record. The caption read, "Owner of record, Arlis Perry Family Trust." Below it, a parade of comments marched in single file, a neighbor's apology, a stranger's outrage, a cousin of a friend's lecture about morals. Then someone tagged Jody's old posts, the ones where she'd written, "Finally, our dream home," with a row of sparkling hearts. The contrast was loud. I didn't type. Near dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from my granddaughter. "Grandma, people are defending you online. Want me to say anything?" I typed back. "Sweetheart, we don't fight with words. We live right." She replied with a single blue heart. I closed my eyes and let that small kindness settle like a warm stone in my palm. The next day, an old colleague from the library called. "I thought you should know, she said, voice soft with the care that comes from long winters shelving books together. Lyle's firm posted a note. He's suspended pending ethical review. The phrase landed in my ear with professional coldness, the way bureaucratic language hides a bruise. I thanked her. Because gratitude is a discipline, not a feeling. When I hung up, I sat still long enough to hear the air conditioner kick on. He's my son. That truth. I drove to the grocery store with a list so short it felt like a dare. Bread, lemons, oatmeal. In the produce aisle, under the hum of fluorescent lights, I saw Jody. Her hair was pulled back with the speed of someone who had stopped caring how it looked. She tried to pivot away, but the cart jammed, and we were face to face among the oranges. We stood there, the two of us, inside a little citrus-colored courtroom. "Take care of yourself," I said. No sarcasm, no sugar, only the ordinary mercy strangers owe each other. She blinked hard. "I didn't think it would go this far." "None of us ever do," I answered. "That's how far works." Her throat moved like she was swallowing a stone. She nodded, backed away, and left one orange rolling across the tile. I caught it with my palm and set it back in the pyramid. Then I finished my list. By midweek, the cafe talk had shifted from gossip to consequences. A couple at the next table whispered about a canceled open house. Someone else mentioned a contractor refusing to start a remodel. The HOA moderator pinned the meeting minutes to the top of the forum. My trust's name, bold as daylight. The post stayed polite. It didn't have to gloat. A few neighbors waved at me across the parking lot, tentative at first, then warmer. I waved back because I have no use for extra enemies. That evening, I walked the shoreline. The sky threw copper coins across the bay, and the pelicans did their clumsy, confident dives. Ray's voice arrived the way it always does near water. Home isn't walls, it's how you live inside them. I said it out loud, testing the sentence against the wind. Then I am finally home. My feet kept time with the tide, and for a moment I believed I could forgive the future for not warning me sooner. Before bed, I opened the folder marked Noise and scrolled without sound. Outrage grows tired faster than truth. The comments had begun to cool, replaced by recipes, politics, a lost dog. I closed the laptop. Not everything needs my attention to be real. I set the kettle, cut a lemon, and wrote tomorrow's list on a sticky note. Call Zara, print the insurance letter again, replace the batteries in the smoke detector. Ordinary tasks. the kind that stitch a day back together. On the balcony, St. Petersburg exhaled, boats blinking, palms fussing in a light breeze. I thought of Lyle, suspended between decisions, the way a bridge holds weight until someone chooses a direction. Justice had done its work. Love would have to do the rest. When I finally turned out the light, the room felt simple and honest. I slept without dreaming. A small mercy I accepted like rain. Peace, I've learned, is not loud. It's a room where you can hear your own name and not flinch. And still, even in that peace, a practical thought crossed my mind as I folded the grocery receipt and slid it into the drawer. People always behave differently when they learn what a thing is worth. The wave that had broken into quiet foam along the bay gathered again somewhere beyond the horizon. I didn't need to chase it. It would find shore soon enough. I kept breathing. The phone rang just after breakfast. I was halfway through folding laundry when I saw the caller ID. Franklin Realty. My heart stilled. Franklin was the man who handled the Perry neighborhood listings for decades. He'd watched our cul-de-sac grow from sandlots into families. Arlis, he said, friendly but hesitant. Did you hear what your old place just appraised for? I laughed softly, unsure what game fate wanted to play this morning. I don't really keep up anymore. Well, he continued, nearly triple the last valuation. Whoever had it assessed left money on the table. A lot of it. I froze. The clean dish towel clenched in my fist. Triple. My stomach tightened. Not from greed, but from the realization of motive. They hadn't pushed me out for convenience. They'd done it for profit. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet kitchen staring at my reflection in the microwave door. It looked like someone else's face. Older, maybe wiser, I whispered. So that's what it was all for. 2 hours later, I was at the county records office again, the clerk already recognizing me from my last visit. You're back. She smiled gently. Back, I echoed. I'm looking for one more thing. Recent trust filings connected to the Perry address. She typed quickly, the rhythmic clicks echoing like a metronome of exposure. Here it is. Filed under Jody Lane Revocable Living Trust. The words landed like a stone in my chest. My son's name wasn't anywhere. She'd transferred everything under her own control. I thanked the clerk, walking out into the Florida sunlight that felt a little harsher than before. He gave her everything, I murmured, even what wasn't his. At the diner down the street, I ordered coffee but barely touched it. The chatter of plates and conversations blended into white noise until I caught a familiar voice behind me. Oh, I made sure his mom can't touch a dime of it, Jody said, laughing to someone I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But no, the tone, the self-satisfaction, it was her. My hand trembled slightly around the cup. I didn't turn around. Instead, I focused on the steam curling from my coffee, as if it could carry the anger away. People confess most easily when they think no one is listening. I finished my drink, left a tip, and walked out with the clarity of someone who's finally stopped doubting herself. That evening, I went through my old files again, paper, digital, even those tucked away in emails I hadn't opened in years. Somewhere in the noise of transactions, a pattern emerged, a transfer dated 4 months before I was asked to move out. A small withdrawal from my late husband's care fund, one Jody had no legal access to. I traced the route, saw the authorization mark, my old digital signature, crudely copied. The room went still. I whispered to the empty air. So that's what you feared I'd find. The next morning, I met Zara, my lawyer friend, at our usual cafe by the pier. I handed her the folder, neatly organized, every page labeled and time-stamped. She flipped through in silence, her expression tightening as she read, "Arlis, this is substantial, enough to reopen everything." I nodded, calm in a way I hadn't been for months. "I don't want to destroy anyone," I said. "I just want the truth in print." She smiled faintly. "And that's exactly what it'll be." As we stood to leave, the gulls wheeled above the water, calling out over the sound of waves. I looked out across the bay and said quietly, "They thought I left with nothing but shame. But shame, like truth, can be repurposed if you know how to hold it right." The HOA meeting room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale coffee, an odd mix of bureaucracy and reckoning. I took the same seat I'd sat in months ago. When Jody first tried to smile her way through property paperwork she didn't understand, Tristan, the HOA manager, greeted me with a professional nod. "Mrs. Perry, thanks for coming on short notice." I set my folder on the table. The one labeled Board Actions. "Of course," I said softly. "I like to keep things clear." Around us, the residents murmured. Word had already spread, something about an ownership issue. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had already checked in, it just needed a place to sit. When the projector flickered on, the room went silent. The screen displayed the familiar address, 214 Sunset Palms Drive. Then, line by line, the official record appeared. Owner of record, Arlis Perry Family Trust, established 1998. Jody's name wasn't there. Lyle's wasn't either. Tristan read from the enforcement clause, "Any attempt to occupy or transfer property without verified authorization constitutes a breach of the community charter." He paused. "A motion has been submitted to revoke temporary gate access and voting privileges for the Crows." No one spoke. Then, from somewhere near the front, a small voice said, "So that's that." The gavel came down gently. It didn't sound like punishment, it sounded like punctuation. 2 hours later, the Florida sun was sharp enough to sting. We stood at the gate of what used to be my exile and was, again, my home. Kendrick, the community officer, typed into his handheld terminal. "Their code's been deactivated, ma'am. Try yours." I pressed the old key fob, the same one Jody once said was outdated. The gate opened without hesitation. Inside, boxes lined the foyer, half filled, half forgotten. The air smelled of citrus, cleaner, and defeat. Lyle appeared from the kitchen, pale and hollow-eyed. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked at him, not unkindly. "We can listen. Words can come later." Tristan read from his clipboard, "Notice of compliance, 72 hours for removal of unauthorized occupants." I simply nodded. The words unauthorized occupants echoed quietly between us. On the doormat lay a white envelope stamped with the HOA logo. "Welcome back. Owner." Inside, there was a new parking decal, a gate fob, and a handwritten note from the HOA president. "Thank you for your patience and clarity. The neighborhood appreciates your example." I clipped the fob to my keyring, the same hook that once bore Jody's label. Ours. When I glanced up, Jody was watching from the doorway. Her eyes shimmered, not with anger this time, but something closer to comprehension. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. The silence between us was the verdict. Outside, by the hibiscus hedge that had survived every storm. Lyle tried again. "She said it was legal. Mom, she said we could." I raised a hand. "Son," I said evenly, "this neighborhood speaks one language: paperwork." From my folder, I slid him a copy of the meeting minutes and the compliance schedule. "Use this to plan," I said. "That's all I have for today." He nodded once, his throat tightening. Jody looked down, tracing the edge of the curb with her shoe. The officer signed off the inspection log and handed it to me. "Everything's in order, Mrs. Perry." "Always was," I said. The wind chime above the porch clicked twice, like the end of a sentence. That night, back at my condo, the world finally exhaled. I slid the welcome back envelope behind the divider labeled Board Actions. Steam from my tea rose in slow spirals, the color of calm. Out the window, I could just see the faint glow of the neighborhood lights, steady, no longer flickering. They lost access, the board, and the story. I whispered to the quiet room. I didn't win. The truth did. I set an alarm for dawn. There would be more paperwork tomorrow, just not the kind that breaks hearts. The sky over St. Petersburg was pink with first light when I stepped onto the sidewalk, my folder tucked beneath my arm. At the HOA kiosk, a crisp notice fluttered under glass. Community Compliance Update. No names, no finger pointing, just policy. Yet every resident would know. I leaned closer, tracing the printed line. Unauthorized access will result in daily fines effective immediately. The edges of the sheet lifted in the morning breeze, like it was exhaling for the whole neighborhood. I took a picture, saved it to a new folder, S19 Bulletin Dawn, JPG. By the time I turned toward home, I could already hear whispers moving like wind through hedges. On the sidewalk, Mrs. Hampton tugged her terrier along and offered a quiet nod. Sympathy without intrusion. Others lowered their voices when I passed, their tones soft, regretful. I returned the greeting with a steady morning. No bitterness, no performance. When the rules speak, I thought, rumors rest. At the main gate, the LED blinked red twice as someone ahead of me entered an invalid code. The guard looked over, shaking his head. When I lifted my restored fob, the barrier rose clean and deliberate, a gavel in motion. A few blocks down, my old house sat silent. The blinds were drawn tight, boxes stacked like barricades against truth. I didn't knock. I simply documented. Curb, mailbox, timestamp. Facts were enough. Later that morning, in the HOA clubhouse, Tristan printed the violation letter while the copier hummed like distant thunder. Section 7. 4. Fines begin at noon, he said. The page listed dates, amounts, signature lines. I signed neatly, owner of record, receipt acknowledged, no victory rush, only the clarity that follows proper order. Money counts what pride ignores. My mind noted as I stepped aside for the next resident. When I reached the curb, Lyle was waiting. His tie hung loose. The weight in his eyes said more than words could. "Mom," he began, "can't you pause the fines while we figure things out?" I handed him a copy of the policy. "Policies aren't punishments," I said. "They're boundaries you chose to cross." Jody stood on the porch, arms folded, mouth tight. I didn't look at her long enough for the anger to return. "The board laid out the steps," I added. "Follow them." Nothing more. By dusk, the air smelled faintly of rain. I brewed tea and scanned each document, the bulletin, the violation notice, the gate log, saving them into board actions. 10 public reckoning, PDF. Steam fogged the laptop screen for a heartbeat, blurring my reflection. "Public consequences aren't revenge," I murmured to no one. "They're records." The house across the street switched on its porch light. The world kept moving. I set the alarm for dawn, a reminder to call insurance about the coming storm, both the one in the clouds and the one still rumbling through paper trails. The morning news warned of heavy rain rolling toward St. Petersburg. I'd lived here long enough to know the difference between a drizzle and a threat. I taped the edges of my condo windows, filled a kettle, and set out candles just in case the power failed. The air smelled like salt and copper. A text alert from the HOA buzzed, "Prepare for wind and flood risk." I thought of the house, their house now, with its clogged gutters and unsealed shutters. "A storm tests not just roofs," I murmured, "but what we've built beneath them." By noon, the mail carrier knocked with a thick envelope marked HOA Claims and Owner Verification. Inside was a reimbursement check from the insurance company. The payee line read clearly, "Arlis Perry Family Trust." Someone had placed a yellow sticky note on top. "We confirmed ownership before issuing payment." I folded the check neatly once, slid it into a folder labeled "Repairs," and whispered to no one. "And that's why patience pays dividends." I took a photo of it beside yesterday's compliance bulletin. Documentation was oxygen now. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, palms bent low, and the rain hit sideways. From my balcony, lightning cracked over the Gulf, lighting the gated entrance in ghostly blue. Somewhere near Sunset Palms Drive, I could see police lights reflected on puddles. A neighbor texted a picture. The house's porch had collapsed, roof half gone. The words under the image read, "Hope everyone's safe." I zoomed in and saw my old mailbox twisted in the wind. I closed my eyes. "Storms don't choose sides," I whispered. "They reveal them." Night fell like a curtain, and thunder rolled again. My phone rang. Jody. Her voice trembled through the static. "The roof's gone. We need the insurance check. Please." I listened to the rain against my glass. "The check is addressed to the trust," I said. "I can't change that." There was only breathing, then thunder louder than either of us. She cried softly. I added, "Maybe this is how the house decides where it belongs." The call ended without goodbye. At sunrise, I drove through wet streets to the HOA office, the check dry and flat in its folder. The officer met me with a clipboard. "We'll release repairs once the trust approves contractors," he said. I signed the endorsement, my name steady. Then another form, temporary housing credit under the same trust. It meant I could stay safely where I was. As I left, the clouds were already breaking apart, streaks of pink over the drenched pavement. The storm had taken half the roof, but not my foundation. The morning sun slipped through the blinds like soft ribbons of gold. I unlocked the door of my newly repaired house, the same threshold that had once felt like exile. Now, the scent of fresh paint greeted me instead of silence. Every beam, every wall carried the echo of both loss and endurance. I brushed my hand along the doorframe and smiled. A home only changes, I thought, when the person inside it does. A small bouquet waited on the counter, white lilies and a card from the HOA. "Welcome home again, Mrs. Perry." For the first time in months, my name felt safe under my own roof. That afternoon, I found an envelope in the mailbox, plain, unmarked except for Jody's handwriting. I stood for a moment before opening it. Inside, her words were careful, almost fragile. "We've left Florida. I know we went too far. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. No excuses, no manipulation, just exhaustion on paper." I folded the letter once and set it beside my teacup. I didn't burn it. I didn't frame it. I just let it exist. "Some words don't need forgiveness," I whispered. "Only distance." A few days later, the HOA invited me to a small brunch in the clubhouse garden. The air smelled of wet soil and citrus blossoms after the storm. Tristan, the manager, stood before the neighbors and said, "We want to thank Mrs. Perry for her patience and her example of integrity." Some clapped. Some lowered their eyes, knowing pieces of the story that had traveled quietly through the neighborhood. I smiled and said simply, "Sometimes standing still is the loudest thing you can do." Applause followed. Not loud, not showy, but warm. It was the kind that acknowledged not victory, but survival. That evening, I met my lawyer at the office downtown. The trust papers lay open between us. I'd thought long and hard about what legacy meant, beyond property, beyond inheritance. "I want to amend the trust," I told him. "After I'm gone, the house will fund scholarships for single mothers in this county." He nodded, quietly moved. "If I couldn't save my own family from greed," I said, signing with a steady hand, "maybe I can help someone else save theirs." The pen glided across the paper, closing one life's chapter and opening another. At dusk, I walked along the beach. The air carried that clean, salty scent that only comes after storms. The horizon glowed gold and rose, the tide whispering over the sand. I could almost hear my husband's voice again. "The tide always brings back what's meant to stay," I whispered back. I stayed. That's enough. The waves erased my footprints one by one. The camera would fade on that image, the ocean smoothing everything that had been jagged, leaving only light. Final voiceover. Forgiveness isn't letting them in again. It's letting yourself out. And if you've been here with me through it all, thank you. Tell me where you're watching from. And remember, peace is always earned. When I look back now, I realize this story was never about property, titles, or signatures. It was about boundaries, the kind that protect not only a home, but the heart that built it. I learned that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of dignity holding its ground. To anyone watching who has ever felt dismissed, disrespected, or replaced, remember this: truth has no expiration date. Stand firm, keep your records, and never let anger speak louder than self-respect. You can rebuild peace, one quiet decision at a time. If my story touched you, tell me where you're watching from. Type 1 in the comments if you've ever had to reclaim your peace the hard way, or share your lesson so others can learn too. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing strength, one story at a time.